I understand this is a very difficult thing to handle, but we feel strongly as an organization that this is disciplining in a child, and whether it's an abusive situation or not, or whether he went too far disciplining, we feel very strongly that that is the court's decision to make. But we also understand the seriousness of abusing children as well.
Minnesota Vikings general manager Rick Spielman announced earlier today the team's star running back Adrian Peterson will play this weekend against the New Orleans Saints. Just within the last hour, local Houston TV station KHOU reported Peterson was investigated but not charged for abusing another one of his sons last year. A former Texas prosecutor telling a local CBS affiliate reporting that the earlier allegations can be used as evidence against Peterson in the current case pending against him. This new reporting out of Houston has not been independently verified by NBC News. But all of this after Peterson was indicted on Friday by a grand jury on charges of reckless or negligent injury to a child for beating his 4-year-old son. The beating allegedly resulted in cuts and bruises to the child's back, buttocks, ankles, legs, and scrotum. In a statement on Friday, Peterson's attorney concluded that the charge, quote, involves using a switch to spank his son. Today, Peterson released his own statement, which reads in part, "I have learned a lot. I've had to reevaluate how I discipline my son going forward, but I am, without a doubt, not a child abuser." Based on reporting from Sports Radio 610 in Houston, which obtained a draft of the police report, Peterson's son said, quote, "Daddy Peterson hit me on my face." Sports Radio 610 also reports that the child also expressed worry that Peterson would punch him in the face if the child reported the incident to authorities. Vikings' initial reaction after the indictment broke had been to bench Peterson for yesterday's game against the Patriots. Since then, two things have happened. One is that without one of the best running backs in the game, the Vikings lost by 23 points yesterday and only managed to gain 54 yards rushing. The other is that a backlash to the backlash sprang up around the story. In other words, people began rushing to the defense of Adrian Peterson and of physically disciplining children. Comedian D.L. Hewley taking to Facebook, writing, "Adrian Peterson was indicted in Texas for swatting his son with a switch. Who knew that was illegal? Because my mama would be in jail." Basketball Hall of Famer Charles Barkley took a similar stance, talking to Jim Rome on CBS's pregame show yesterday.
We spank kids in the South. I think the question about did Adrian Peterson go overboard? But listen, Jim, we all grew up in different environments. Listen, every black parent in my neighborhood in the South would be in trouble or in jail under those circumstances.
On the other side, there was ESPN's Chris Carter, former Minnesota Viking, who got emotional yesterday when talking about growing up and getting disciplined by his mother.
My mom did the best job she could do, raising 7 kids by herself. But there are thousands of things that I have learned since then that my mom was wrong.
Yes. Thank you.
It's the 21st century. My mom was wrong. She did the best she could, but she was wrong about some of that stuff she taught me. And I promise my kids I won't teach that mess to them. You can't beat a kid to make them do what they want to do.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thousands of things we have learned since then.
Joining me now, Stacey Patton. She's senior reporter for the Chronicle of Higher Education, author of the memoir That Mean Old Yesterday about her childhood in foster care, also creator of group Spare the Kids, and MSNBC contributor Goldie Taylor, managing editor of Faultline JPS. Goldie, let me start with you. One of the I found the reaction to this story almost immediate on social media and everywhere. People saying what Charles Barkley said, basically. D.L. Hewley, I was spanked as a kid, or I had to go choose the switch, and that's how I was disciplined as a kid. I turned out all right. But it seems to me like we should focus on the facts as being reported here. Now, I don't know if they're true, but what's in the police report is a child, bleeding from his genitals, a child with cuts a week later, possibly on the face, naked, leaves stuffed in the mouth. I mean, we should distinguish this as the model case for physical discipline and the broader issue, it seems to me.
We do have to distinguish it because the incident as described in this police report is nothing short of a flogging. If, for instance, this child had been a woman, underneath Roger Goodell's new policy, his domestic violence policy, this would have been a first offense with mitigating circumstances, meaning if this child had been a woman and there was a child present during this altercation, then he would have been banned from the NFL with a right to appeal after a year if this had been, a significant other. Right. But because it's a child, there are many people who are regarding this as Adrian Peterson's own business. Now, how someone disciplines their child is their business within the confines of a certain portion of the law. But when it steps over that line it becomes a public safety issue, which means it becomes our business, and that means we're the stakeholders here.
And Stacey, much of what I've seen has been skepticism and fear about who draws that line and how it gets drawn. This idea that Child Protective Services in people's houses, taking people's kids away, or criminalizing or making illegal a whole cohort of parents, and as Charles Barkley said, black parents in the South, but there's also lots of white parents, across races, across regional parts of the country, right? That's the concern. Who gets to make that call?
Yeah, it's a very real fear, particularly in African American culture, where you have this long history of state intervention in black family life, going all the way back to the plantation. It's a very real fear, but what we have to realize is that we've got to evolve our practices because of the growing illegality of certain kinds of physical discipline against children. There's been 50 years of research that shows the negative impact of hitting children as they're developing, particularly on their brains, their biochemical responses that happen in their brains that can alter the physical architecture of a child's brain. And so you have pediatricians, educators, the mental health community, social workers, teachers are all coming out against this. And you have a culture that's shifting away from this type of behavior of children. And for African Americans, there's a different kind of cultural specificity to this problem in a perverse way in which we celebrate this. Meanwhile, we have to pay attention to the growing racial disparities in terms of school performance, in terms of who gets put in foster care,
right,
and how foster care is becoming a feeder to the juvenile justice and adult prison pipelines.
Goldie, when you heard this story, particularly the switch and selecting the switch as reported, what went through your head? What do you think about?
There are a number of things that went through my head. I remember my aunt telling me, you better stop crying before I give you something to cry for. She wanted me to align my emotional response to violence based on the threat of more violence. There were days when I was paddled in school, paddled by a neighbor, and then beat the hell out of when I got home, all for the same offense of not turning in my homework. But let me tell you that the boys in our family got it even harder. I had an uncle who felt strongly that either he kept you in line at home or the streets would get you together. And so he fought damn hard to make sure that 13 of us living in and out of that house had, all of the structure necessary, but he meted out discipline in a very, very severe way. Unfortunately, it didn't have the outcome that he was hoping for. You see, there's not a man in my family alive who was born after 1986 because the streets did take them. Those paddlings didn't, stop all of that. And I think I told one of the producers earlier tonight, my uncle passed away of a heart attack in 1985. My cousin Buki and I, about the same age, usually got our whippings together. We went out back, took my uncle's old axe, and chopped down the tree that he used to use to beat us with. We chopped it up in pieces over hours, and we burned it in his old trash pile. That is the kind of severe trauma that we had even in his death. We weren't happy that he was dead, but we were happy to be able to burn that tree once and for all.
And Stacey, that point, that the fear that without this then comes chaos, I've seen repeated again and again and again all over social media, people writing to me saying, look, you don't understand the situation that I'm in trying to discipline my kids. And this is the thing, this is the thin line over which, if I don't have this, if this isn't there, there's no structure, there's no discipline, there's just chaos. This
fear goes all the way back to the plantation, where if you spend some time reading slave narratives, you'll hear the voices of slave women who whipped their children with switches, stripped them naked like Peterson did his child.
Allegedly.
And they would say, look, allegedly, look, if I don't do this, a whipping by me is much better than at the hands of an overseer. Flash forward to modern times where you have black parents say, look, if I don't whip my child, then my child will fall prey to the streets, or a police officer will kill him, right, and things will be much worse off. So this fear is very real, and I think we need to understand where that fear comes from. But at the same time, we can't fight oppression with more oppression.
As a parent, I will say, speaking firsthand, that you're never more desperate, more panicked, more sort of near the edge of your capacity than when you feel like your child is on the edge of danger. And so a situation which you always feel like they're on the edge of danger puts you in a situation where you're constantly on edge in that way. Stacey Patton and Goldie Taylor, thank you both.
Thank you, Chris and Goldie.
Thank you, Chris.
We'll be right back.